And I'm very blessed to have some really brilliant friends, and some of whom are scientists, including theoretical physicists. So it's been great to get the input and also get the support from folks that are just like, Rex, this is interesting stuff. It's compelling stuff. I'm not sure I can. I've heard it said like this. From one theoretical physicist friend of mine. He's I right now I don't know what I think about all this. I'm not going to tell you no, and my advice is keep exploring it. And it's been a while since we've talked about it with this particular individual, but his comment was, I look forward to the next time we talk about it and see where it goes. So, but this is the type of guy, and I've known him long enough to know that if he was going to say, Rex, come on, this is BS, he would have, and he's a very sweet guy. He would have done it in a rude way, but he would have let me know, Rex, okay, here's all the reasons why what you're saying is just wrong. Okay, nobody has yet to do that. So, and again, I'm not saying somebody won't at some point come at me like that, but so far it's been surprising, even for the people that have been shown reluctance. Even they're going, keep exploring this. This is kind of interesting. So I'm feeling very excited that I really have something here. That there's something here that let's all get together on this. If this resonates to anybody listening to this, let's come together on this. Let's grow this thing. And I guess if you're a scientist who can help me turn this into working theories in the scientific community, let's definitely do this.
Absolutely. So we started looking at some of those ideas on the last one, which was about 8 months ago. But,
right.
We're back into it now. That's what's important. So the first question I had was, well, it's not really a question. It's just, could we have an overview of why gravity doesn't fit with the standard model of physics, as we were saying earlier on at the start of the video?
Right.
And that was it. Could we just have just go over again why exactly it doesn't fit?
Oh, sure. Because I know we talked about it quite a bit in the last video. So just real quick, basically in gravity, my perception of gravity is that it's the only thing perhaps more fundamental than gravity in the nature of the existence of a multi-universal reality is consciousness itself. That being said, that would suggest that gravity existed before the proposed birth of our universe and will exist beyond the supposed death of our universe, or the death as we see it. So as a result, gravity was not a force that had to be switched on at some point beyond cosmic inflation, as the strong and weak nuclear forces did, and as electromagnetism did. Gravity was already inherently part of the existence and part of the development, everything from the Big Bang to cosmic inflation, to the growth of this entire universe, and even why the universe is now the process of pulling itself apart. It is, like the idea of the force of dark energy, which I believe is actually gravity, but it's an aspect of gravity we don't yet understand. Because no, this is not anti-gravity or reverse gravity, but it's gravity basically working kind of like the movements of water. Gravity can move sort of multiple directions at the same time, even in our matter reality, our physical reality. Look at the way water works, and gravity works and moves, and we see gravitational waves. It's just a matter of time before we recognize gravitational currents. We know gravity bends and moves and stretches and compresses. We already know this. So I think we cannot eliminate gravity as being dark energy, but just rather looking at it as though we just don't fully understand what gravity really is in terms of its connection. So getting back to why it's not part of the theory of everything is because gravity is essentially the reason we have this entire multi-universal, multiple realities, infinitely interdimensional existence that goes well beyond what we perceive to be a singular universe. So no, the theory of everything is about, the development of what we believe to be our matter-based universe. And gravity just goes well beyond that. So therefore, it does not fit into the theory of everything.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, gravity existed prior to the Big Bang and prior to the existence of matter as we know it.
If we're going to look at this, in terms of an arrow of time, yes, which we are, of course. We're on it with this. Because getting into these levels of reality, space, time, gravity is completely different than what we think. It all exists. It's just not what we think it is. But yes, to put it in terms of your question, and in terms of more of our of anthropomorphizing and putting it on an arrow of time, yes, gravity exists before before the primordial atom, as it were, exploded into the cosmic inflation, due to lack of a better metaphor.
Yep, and just to review, the primordial particle is theorized to be a particle which contains all the information of a previous universe condensed into a very, very small area,
I
which
would I wouldn't say
could just
previous. I would just
no.
say it just has the information of a universe.
Hmm.
I mean, again, I guess you could say previous. I wouldn't say that's necessarily an inaccurate word. I guess I don't. Again, in this context, I don't think about it in terms of previous because, in a manner of speaking, it would suggest that it's going to maybe recreate an echo of what it was before, which certainly is one universal possibility. But it also may create something that might be entirely different, even if the physics might be similar. It may end up creating something that might be something completely different than what we might even begin to imagine. Um, so what comes out of the, I'll just say the information of that primordial particle is the information, I think, maybe more accurately, is the information of the universe to be, rather than not the information of the universe that was. Yes, I mean, there's this ongoing cycle of there is a certain oscillating aspect of this. When you start looking at it in the grand multi-universal scale, I'm not saying the universe is not an oscillating universe, although it's possible the universe may have oscillated many times before ripping itself apart. Um, but I just want to say that that information, all that information is in that particle. So you're dealing with something that might not have more um, mass, I suppose. I'm getting at this level. It's hard to use or find the right words exactly. Mass, volume, because then what is really the volume of an atom? And that's just another conversation unto itself. But the point is, let's think in terms of what we perceive to be the space of an electron right now. Again, God, another long conversation. But but in that fundamental particle, which in terms of what most people are thinking of that particle is so incredibly small compared to our reality. But think of that tiny, tiny, tiny little particle with the information of this entire universal experience. And I don't mean that in a context of a single moment, but I mean that in the context of all space, all time, and all probability and possibility and dimensionality. Again, taking into consideration we really only perceive and can observe only 3% of this known universe.
Hmm. Okay. So the second question I had was just something that you mentioned in the last one that I haven't actually heard before, which is the theory of the deep freeze or the big rip.
Well, I mean, basically, it's literally what the name suggests. Shush, sorry. um, um, the big rip, basically. I mean, right now, we can see, we can measure, at least with our current ability to measure, that the universe is expanding. We know this, and what's interesting is that expansion. One would think that the expansion should be slowing down, especially for in some sort of an oscillating space of a universal existence. But the thing is, it's not. This expansion is increasing. Um, so the idea, the current train of thought is that at some point, this expansion is going to become so vast, it's so huge that the light from galaxies will not reach from galaxy to galaxy. The sky will basically go dark. And over the course of all of this, all the fuel and all the energy that drives galaxies, uh, galactic clusters, and so on, will begin to go out. Second law of thermodynamics, entropy will run its course. All that energy is going to go back to first law of thermodynamics. It's going to change states. It's going to become something that is no longer a galaxy, no longer stars, no longer planets. It's all going to die out. And again, in this process, everything getting bigger and bigger. Everything's going to be so far apart that there really will be pretty much no interaction whatsoever in terms of anything we know to be, our experience now. Light cannot reach at those vast distances. And again, with everything kind of slowly going out, the idea is that the universe is going to kind of pull itself apart, and this idea of the deep freeze too is that as all these stellar embodiments run out of energy, the temperature is going to continue to go down to the point where once there is no more perceived energy, it's been suggested that even black holes will evaporate in this environment and cease to exist, and everything will just basically go back to a state of absolute zero. And if absolute zero basically represents a space where there is absolutely no energetic movement whatsoever.
Hmm. Okay,
So
so
meaning there's no atoms, no atomic structures. There's essentially nothing whatsoever that we can identify with.
mhm. So it's essentially just the name of that process, which,
Yes.
yeah,
So
okay.
so it's been suggested that this is the fate of the universe, that it's going to reach a point where it's going to be everything's going to be so far apart that light can't reach anything anymore. It's all going to die out. It's going to run its course. Energy is going to there'll be no more energy to refuel new stars. It's all just going to die out, and eventually it's going to go back to absolute zero, and the existence as we know it just won't exist. And so
Hmm.
that is the current thinking.
Sure. And it would certainly make sense knowing, as you say, the rate of expansion and the apparent ongoing nature of it.
But if we start to apply this to an idea of a multi-universal existence, and all of a sudden you have to look at that and go, wait a second,
Yeah.
that state might exist, but it's not going to be a permanent state. So the
Hmm.
thinking right now is when that state happens, it's going to be a permanent state. No more oscillations, no more anything that we can identify with. So this is where I suggest gravity, the workings of gravity, going beyond the existence of our universe, just our, just what we perceive to be our 13.8 billion year old universe, comes into play. First of all, I'm going to disagree with something that some of the most brilliant minds in history have said. The suggestion that black holes is the remaining singularity that's left over from a black hole. And that's of course still theory right now. What's at the nobody really knows for sure what's at the center of a black hole. But right
Hmm.
now the belief, and this is what resonates to me as well, that there's a singularity taking in this information. All the material from all the stars surrounding stars, or whatever is surrounding, that's being taken into that light. Of course, being among those things being taken in by that black hole, um, all being thrust into a singularity. And this particular part of my idea is not original. This has been suggested, uh, and this is something that resonates to me. I feel like this this singular, there's just no way you're going to convince me that this singularity, once the rest of the universe, and I can see, yes, okay, galaxies are going to die, which is alive does die. Galaxies, the universe as we know, it's going to die. So basically, after all the energy, that energy it dissipates and dies, you still have this super dense, I mean, crazy super dense, super heated singularity that's left over. So first of all, it sounds kind of familiar. It sounds like a lot of the way a lot of cosmologists will describe the primordial particle, of that is essentially the seeding of our current universe. It seems to me such a singularity isn't just going to evaporate away. I don't believe. I mean, you're dealing with such a force and such an interaction of gravitational forces taking place here. Um, I don't think that part of space, if you will, can hit absolute zero. And if we're looking at a multi-universal existence taking place, then we're looking at, even on these vast expanses of what cosmologists refer to as the bulk or hyperspace. I'm just going to call it space because I don't see it as being really any different at this level. Um, Movement is still taking place. If you want to think about the movement of a multiverse, think about a kaleidoscope with no center.
Hmm.
You've watched a kaleidoscope move. You looked into those little things as
I
kids, and
have. I have.
now think about that, but think about that with no center.
Hmm.
All those movements, all those colors and patterns that are, morphing into something, condensing down into something, and out of that comes a bunch of brand new sets of colors and patterns that expand and grow into something else, and they might contract and expand a few times before they grow and oscillate into something beyond that, into a whole other set of colors and patterns.
Hmm.
I see a multiverse acting something like that. I also see this multiverse acting in a toroidal fashion, as in the torus. Nassim Haramein and other cosmologists talk about the torus as in Torus, not the zodiac sign. Now, the torus basically, and this is kind of more my definition of it as I've explored it, the idea of a torus is a self perpetuating energy. I mean, even the first law of thermodynamics, part of that first law is that, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Energy, the amount of energy always remains the same. Okay.
Yep.
That's the first law of thermodynamics. Energy is always changing states. So this is what's happening on this level. Energy is simply moving and changing and condensing and growing and evolving in all kinds of states of consciousness, all kinds of states of experiential reality, all kinds of states of interdimensionality of these universal possibilities, not unlike how we may perceive the universal possibilities of our own lives.
Hmm.
So all of this information exists in these cosmological singularities left over by black holes. I think there's other reasons why these singularities can be created is when you start to imagine the possibilities of everything moving on this kaleidoscopic toroidal fashion. You put this torus together with a kaleidoscope, and the idea of the self-perpetuating energy is the way this energy moves. On the one hand, is being expended, but the expenditure and the release of that energy is also the fuel of the movement of this new energy
Hmm.
in a very basic sense. So when you combine that all together, you see this constantly oscillating, moving multi-universal existence where you have infinite universal possibilities happening all the time at the same time, but at the same time spread out over perhaps a Googleplex of years of existence,
Hmm.
a Googleplex to the Googleplex, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
um, and if we want to try to quantify this, which at these levels, we're talking about ideas of zeros. I love this conversation of zeros and infinities, and maybe we should have that conversation sometime because it ties into everything we're talking about. Um, but you're dealing with things on an incredibly astronomical vast scale beyond which most mathematicians, even the most brilliant mathematicians, even begin to endeavor into. I mean, yet this is part of the experiential form of our existence. It does go out to these expanses, and this is this is consciousness at work. This is all part of that divine being, the source that is the oneness of it all, with which we are all a part, endeavoring to understand itself. For such a being to be all knowing, to be the all, as it were, it has to be the experience of the all. And that all encompasses everything we can even begin to imagine, and everything that goes well beyond anything we might be able to perceive in our current human imagination. I mean, the vastness is just incredible. And this is gravity at work. This is just the movement of all of this is all space-time gravity. Now, and I'm going to put it like this: you have to have a space-time. I mean, space cannot work without the movement of time. Time cannot work without having space to facilitate that movement. And basically, the framework of all of that is gravity. Only this is not just a framework that is our own universal existence, but this is the framework of this vast, incredibly expansive, multi universal existence that I'm attempting to describe.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I like to kind of try and visualize what you say. It's difficult to get a
Well, one
great
of these
picture.
times, if I can, we should maybe, if we, I don't know, we can do this on Zoom.
Hmm.
Maybe let me do a presentation for gravity,
Sure.
and I can include all my pictures, all my slides. I have got, and I also outline when I'm talking. I put bullet points up so people can follow along, and keep in time with what I'm saying. And especially if I happen to get maybe ahead of something, they still have something they can look at to reference back to something else I was talking about. Plus, my presentations tend to be rather visual. They even include a couple of videos that I can use to help give people this visual that I'm explaining. The nice thing about when I gave that presentation to the Society of Scientific Exploration is that I was able to give them that visual part of this description, which I think helped immensely. And I think that's one of the reasons they got so excited about this, because not only because they hear me talking about it, but I was able to give them a visual of what I'm
Representation.
explaining.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. Okay, well, we could do that as a part three to this then,
Great.
would be ideal.
That sounds wonderful.
Okay, we'll set that up for next time. Let's go through. I've got just a couple more questions. One of them you kind of partially answered. We'll start with that one, which is, could you just give kind of a quick review of your water analogy of gravity? We've touched on it, but just to get kind of a more, as I say, a more visual idea of how the two are similar.
Sure. Um, One of the things that happened when we first discovered gravitational waves, and I know probably for a lot of us, sort of nerdy types that are into this, we certainly got excited. And for me, I've been again, I knew an epiphany about gravity was coming. I this is crazy. I'm not claiming to be, Sir Isaac Newton by any stretch, but at the same time, the connection of his story of the idea of an apple falling out of a tree, hitting him in the head, helped him sort of have this epiphany about gravity. Um, Ironically, me falling out of a tree and landing head first. But I'm not trying to make light of that. But but I've had a feeling for years, something about gravity. There is a reason for this, and there was also a reason beyond kind of the long running joke of me referring to my experiment gravity. As a reference to the fall from the tree is becoming the title to my book, and I knew there was going to come up a time where this thing about gravity was going to get bigger than that for me. And I've had an affinity for gravity for some time, and I remember. Somebody really brilliant years ago I was talking to about this. She was saying to me, gravity to me is it's very heavy. It weighs you down. It has a darkness to me, and there's something just negative about gravity. And I'm thinking to myself, and I didn't have an answer for her at the time. And she's somebody who, to me, she's a super brilliant person and a spiritualist. So I took what she said to heart. I certainly was thinking about it, and I didn't say anything. I didn't have a comment for her for that comment at the time. But I remember thinking to myself, I don't feel like gravity is dark, and I get what she's saying. Yes, she's right, but at the same time, I felt like, there's something really just so much more to this, because I felt like gravity, I don't know, I felt like I embraced gravity somehow. And so with gravity, this whole idea of gravitational waves was discovered, it really got me to thinking. And I started doing what I do. I go into my meditational states that I go into, and I just go what I just say, kind of traveling, if you will. I don't really do out of body in the classic sense of what people think of as out of body. It's all just moving at the speed of thought. But anyways, I'm in this space. I'm contemplating this, and of course, like most people, I'm thinking in terms of gravitational waves, and I'm thinking about you know electromagnetism, like light waves. And then I'm thinking, somebody who loves music, I'm thinking in terms of sound waves. I'm like, trying to make connections here. What am I missing? What am I missing? And it hits me: water waves. Gravity and water are not the same things, but I think the way they behave is very, very similar. So if we're going to look at gravitational waves, and thinking in terms of what does that mean, I think we need to get away from the idea of electromagnetism and sound and those types of waves and that type of behavior, and start thinking in terms of the behavior of water. So what I mean by this, a couple of things. First of all, and I think this is just a matter of time. And we already know there's going to be like gravitational lensing, and things that bend and move gravity and move and bend space time. And we already can even see it on Earth. Gravity, space time, I mean, it's not consistent across the entire planet, even in that little tiny space of it. So, sorry, what was the question again? Gosh,
It
I'm
was
sorry, Darren.
just sorry,
I've had
just
a rough few days. I've had sorry, forgive me, man.
sorry, that's not a problem. It was just a review of the water analogy of gravity.
Yes, okay, thank you. So looking into the depths of space, this is a two-parter here, and there's a lot more to this, but I'm just going to do this in just two parts for right now. So looking into the depths of space, especially anything when you talk about not just between, say, stars inside of a galaxy, but start getting into the depths of space between galaxies, and even more to the point, as the universe continues to expand, thinking of the energy going on into the depths of space in this, in the expanses of the vast distances potentially between galaxies. It's even been suggested already from cosmologists and astrophysicists that that's really where the greatest concentrations of energy actually exist. There's actually more energy there in what we consider to be the void than there is in a galaxy. That this what's taking place in the energy, the movements of an entire galactic existence. And that's a really powerful thought. That gets into the concepts of dark energy, and it gets into ideas of so many things that we can't yet even begin to observe and imagine that are always taking place. It's always still part of the fundamental reality. So I think it's just a matter of time before we really discover movements of gravity in these vast expanses of space. Now, this is where it's going to get really, the vast expanses of space that are going to be just like water waves, currents in the ocean. Think of the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the Marianas Trench, and the way water moves, and all these different currents and flows, and how it all works together, and the synchronicities involved, to create the health and vibrancy of these ecosystems. Gravity is very much the same way in playing its key role in the vibrancy of the ecosystem of stellar existence or interstellar existence. But this also accounts also for what's called quantum gravity as well. We know that an atom, for example, is 99.99% space. And there's a lot of ideas. Nobody has a 100% completely agreed upon idea as to what it is that keeps an electron um, connected, if you will, or working with the proton to create, say, a hydrogen atom or an iron atom or any kind of an atom. It's been suggested that maybe it's electromagnetism. Maybe it could do with a strong and weak nuclear force. The strong nuclear force, of course, I think is what's associated with what holds together the nucleus of an atom with the proton and neutron. Um, but it's still fairly nebulous as to what it is that holds the atom itself together. The atom is mostly space. I'm going to say that as we discover and we start to observe on these more micro, at the same time more macro, super macro levels, we're going to realize that these gravitational currents also work in the contents of the space of an atom. And that's a conversation we should have another time, because
Hmm.
there's really a lot to what is an atom, what is an electron, what does that really mean in terms of the information and what its relationship to the universe actually is.
Hmm.
So there's that element of it. So the other part of this too, getting into why, and this also elaborates a little bit more on why gravity, I think, is also dark energy, and why it is also part of why the universe is now pulling apart at an ever faster rate. And I will cover an entire universal existence from the primordial particle to the big rip in my presentation. I'm going to explain this whole thing.
Hmm.
So if you don't understand this for this little snippet right here, I will elaborate in part 3,
Yeah.
when I can give you visuals. But simply think about, and this also explains why, as the universe is expanding, why galactic clusters are still holding together, why galaxies are still holding together, why different aspects of the universe still are clearly, as you look at the universal neural net, are still holding itself together. There's of course, the questions of dark matter. Again, this is all related and connected to gravity. And we don't begin to have the time right this second to dive into the nooks and crannies of this, but I just want to give this one analogy, getting into water. Um, if you're sitting on a beach, and I think you and I maybe have talked about this. Maybe I said this in the last part 1. I may have
Yeah.
given this analogy,
Yeah.
but I'll,
We'll
I'll
do
do
it
it
again.
again.
Hmm.
We're sitting on a beach, preferably with an ocean, when you've got, at least say 4 or 5, 6 foot waves that are crashing in on the beach. Of course, when you look out over the ocean, you can see that, even if you got 6 foot waves crashing in, it's not to say that they're all 6 feet. There's varying sizes of the waves that are coming in. And within those waves, you see ripples and movements in those waves. And within those waves, there's more and more ripples and movements, right on down to pretty much down to the molecular level. Now, watching those waves crash up onto the ocean beach, you'll watch like one layer of water rush up the beach, and then it rushes right back down into the water, right? Back
Hmm.
into the ocean. Now, if you're really paying attention, you realize there's not just one of those lapping up over the beach. It's this, even just take the space of say 100 feet, or I don't know. I know I'm an American, so I'm using feet. So let's just even say I don't know, 30 meters or something like that. Um, um, but in that space, you can see where the water is lapping up, coming up to the beach pretty high on one side. Another area, the water is going back down. Another areas, water's coming back up. Another area is going back down.
Hmm.
Right? This is all going on just even in that very small space of a beach.
Yeah. Constant ebb and
Now, if you're
flow.
looking even closer, no more closely at the water, you can watch the water. One layer of water coming in is water literally moves underneath.
Yeah.
You can see it. I've
Hmm.
seen it. I've watched it many times. And water goes underneath that water. It's an incredible thing about water, how it can do that. One layer of water is coming in, but there's water moving out right at the same time. Of course, as you're out if you're a few feet out into away from the beach into the water, that's called an undertow, and that water that's moving underneath the water might grab you and pull you under and take you out, a little
Yeah.
ways out into the sea, so to speak. I've actually had that happen before, and it can be very disconcerting, and
I'm
it's
sure.
amazing how fast you can find yourself like 100 yards from shore.
Yes.
It's,
Absolutely.
um, but water is even more dynamic than that. Those layers, there's multiple layers going on, and all I'm explaining is what I could see with my human eyes. This is going on right down to molecular levels. And if you want to start thinking about this, gravity moving like that, so think about a galactic cluster, or a galaxy itself. Is those areas where gravity is moving in, okay? Those areas, that's a part of gravity that's still moving in. It's still doing the work to continue to facilitate the creation of this galactic structure, all the things that it needs to facilitate all the chemical process that take place to continue its life process. It's a reason why such a structure can still hold together while the rest of the structure is in fact pulling itself apart. So you've got, much like water, aspects of this gravity that's waving into these galaxies and galactic structures and stellar structures, meaning solar systems and such. Well, at the same time, you've got also these layers of gravity that are moving away, and these layers of gravity that are moving away are taking these bodies that are being held together and pulling them apart from each
Right.
other.
Yeah. Hmm.
See what I'm
That
saying?
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So again, this is something that when we do the presentation part of it, I'll
Hmm.
delve into this because I'm going to take part of my presentation is I go through the entire universal life cycle as I see it is my ideas, and I will explain even where supermassive black holes come from and the context of that initial cosmic inflation, that superheated, ultra dense ball of plasma that is still so hot that no form of atomic development has begun to take place yet. I'm going to explain what's going on inside of that and why that gives way to the earliest forms of stellar and galactic embodiments,
Hmm.
and also supermassive black holes.
I think certainly having the imagery to go along with it will help with the understanding
Yes.
for many people. But you actually touched on the last question I had, which was just to give a brief overview again on the nature of plasma.
Well, plasma is actually all around us. I mean, we have, plasma TVs, and I mean, it's a part of our reality all over the place. Plasma is at the heart of our sun. Um, and plasma is also, essentially the most core fundamental building block of our universe. I don't think anybody yet really, this plasma is something that nobody, even again, scientists are still figuring out plasma. And I think there's a lot to it. The short answer for now, I think, is plasma. The cool thing to me about plasma, the fascinating thing, is that plasma can be harder than any solid. It can be more liquid than any liquid, and as gaseous as any gas. It is all of those things. And plasma being essentially what was the first, I don't know what you want to call it, substance of our sort of embryonic stage of universal growth. It's still, I mean, it's I forget the terminology for it, but there's a type of sort of a telescopic observation we can do, and its term is escaping me right now, but we can deduce the plasma existence that still exists throughout. I mean, the glow from the Big Bang itself, this plasma glow from the Big Bang itself, can still be measured throughout the expanse of our known universe in
Hmm.
varying degrees, of course, but it's still there.
That
Uh,
cosmic radiation.
it is that cosmic background
That's
radiation.
yeah.
That's based in plasma. That's the core. That's like the remaining core of that of cosmic inflation. That's what I think cosmologists call the afterglow of cosmic inflation. That can still be measured even now. And I feel like that's plasma. This is all again very much theoretical. There's this is nobody. No, this is not like it's being this part of it. I think is being discussed much in science. This is a lot of just me throwing ideas out there. But think about it like this: plasma existed before electromagnetism, which suggests to me plasma is also something that likely exists on a multi-universal scale. Okay, which suggests that plasma doesn't necessarily follow the cosmic speed limits that light has in place for our matter-based reality. So, getting a little kind of deviating a little bit, I feel like when a time comes when we figure out how to travel faster than light, because obviously that's what's going to have to happen if we're even going to go to Alpha Centauri, which is just 4 light years away from here,
Sure.
without having it to be a multi-years long journey. I mean, even at light speed, it's still a 4-year journey. So the idea of faster than light speed, I think, may come in this level of plasma reality. This plasma level of, and again, it's tough to explain because people are like, no, we've got plasma TVs. Plasma exists on this physical. It does, but this is the crazy thing about plasma is that it's so incredibly dynamic, and
Yeah.
that it's a part of everything. In a way that I think the faster than when we figure out faster than light speed, it's going to come from our understanding of this cosmic afterglow. Because if there's anything in the universe that can move faster than light, it's plasma.
Yeah. That's why it's used a lot in science fiction, isn't it? As
Yes.
plasma engines and things like that, because
Yes.
that's the base idea.
It sure is, and I think getting in this idea of creating a warp bubble that happens that you see like in Star Trek. I think it's a great
Yeah.
idea, but I think we're going to find it based in plasma. This whole idea of what they call I'm so bad at remembering terminology sometimes, but some of the alternate universes they created, like a Star Trek Voyager, like liquid space. And there's another one too that was really cool that I can't think of right now. But I think a lot of this, again, the idea of subspace, that they're getting this warp bubble, I think is going to be connected somehow to plasma. This idea of liquid space, who's to say that this isn't a plasma-based space? Because again, as I said, plasma can be more liquid than any liquid. So who's to say that this liquid space isn't still plasma? But I think when we move forward, unlocking the key to faster than light travel might be in this plasma space. And then getting back to plasma being part of the supermassive, like the birth of supermassive black holes, you have to think that even though everything in this initial cosmic inflation would have been dense beyond anything we can fathom. I mean, this is a level of density that goes well beyond the center of our sun, which is well beyond lead or anything else. Um, but it's kind of hard to imagine. And one thing one analogy I'll use in my presentation is a glacier. Of course, glaciers move very slowly, but glaciers are extremely hard. I've never stood on a glacier, but if you stand in one, you're not going to fall through. They're like ice, or harder than
Hmm.
ice,
Mm.
basically. Yet glaciers move with the malleability of a river. They might move very slowly, but they have the malleability of a liquid. If you ever watch a glacier move, that's been done in time lapse photography or time lapse video, they move very fluidly. There's no like stops. There's no stop start or stuttered kind of motion with a glacier. It's very fluid looking when you see it move. When you see that movement sped up. And I'm thinking, we're dealing with something in that initial cosmic inflation, that initial ball of plasma, that first embryonic state of our universal development, is being incredibly dense, but it's also incredibly dynamic. And what I'm saying about that is there's the movements taking place inside that ball of plasma, I think are extremely detailed, and no doubt are traveling faster than light. It is all happening. Of course, when cosmologists describe this process, it's all happening at like microns of a second. This whole part of the universal growth took place in a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second. And it would make sense that all these dynamics are taking place at faster than light speeds. So you have to think, with all that pressure going on, that's certainly pushing this ball outward and outward and outward as it's getting ready to give way to the next phase of cosmic growth. In that, the pressures must be so great as to create something like a black hole inside that cosmic ball, even before we've reached the point of having stars and galaxies. Those initial supermassive black holes, I think, are already forming even within that galactic, that initial cosmic, the cosmic ball of inflation, cosmic ball of cosmic inflation. Sorry, I'm mixing my words up here. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. So when you start seeing that kind of dynamism taking place within that plasma ball, you sort of give yourself a little bit of a visual as to why it is that point, that despite the force of gravity holding it down, it still has enough force to continue to force its way out to the point where something finally switched, where all of a sudden the universe was struggling to try to hold itself together as gravity now is pulling it apart at ever faster rates, where gravity's sort of assumed control and said, okay, now it's my turn. I'm just going to pull you apart now. But this is the point with which it's all very, very powerfully held together. And the density and and mass in that density is so incredibly great that those gravitational pressures are beyond comprehension. But yet the energetic movements inside this ball of plasma, the initial cosmic inflation is so intense, it's working against that to the point where it's still forcing a growth of this early universal stage, this early universal life cycle, if you will. So again, I mean, we'll expand on that even more and more. But I mean, you think as soon as those first supermassive black holes start becoming formed, as this ball continues to expand out, eventually the first cracks, which we might define as, to us in this day and age, as space, start to form. And I think now at this point, things are cooling off enough, or maybe this is where we're starting to see electromagnetism starting to assert itself, the strong and the weak nuclear forces beginning to assert themselves. And with this, the formation of the first atomic structures like helium and hydrogen, that's beginning to happen as this is starting to push out. So the dynamism is now continuing to increase even more, till eventually you've got enough expansion, enough cracks in space, or maybe the first early versions of a star might get formed, early versions of some kind of a system may be formed. And now, of course, then the cycle begins, because that star goes through its life cycle, it dies, leaves the chemically enriched guts of the next phase of development. as this cosmic inflation continues to grow and grow and grow till it starts to look like an early form of a universe with which we can more identify with as being our current universe.
So, am I understanding this right? So, kind of this is explaining how the Big Bang may have occurred from an initial state of solid plasma, and
Absolutely, yes. That's where I'm going. Yes.
as that begins to cool, cracks begin to appear in which this plasma is able to begin to form the basis of matter. And then, as
Yes.
it cools and cools and cools, more and more and more matter is created, which causes your cosmic inflation as it begins to develop.
Well, and eventually, then eventually this moves beyond that cosmic inflation, that state of cosmic inflation. It starts to look a little bit more like the first examples of galactic and star formation,
Yeah,
which would have been, which we are now. Some cosmologists say our star is a third generation star. That's a theory, of course, but that would suggest that these would be the first generations of those stars. The what we some cosmologists call proto stars, and maybe the early proto galaxies.
I see. Okay, well, that, I mean, covers all the questions I had. Probably if we leave this part here and then carry on with your actual presentation in part three.
Let's do that. And the presentation, it might be a couple of hours. That's something I won't want to rush, because one thing I'm going to do in the presentation, if it's okay with you, is I'm going to do it like I've never presented this to you before or to the audience that's listening to this. They're going to just hear it from the ground floor up. I think that's the best way to do this presentation, and also to look at me the opportunity to, of course, expand upon a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And yes, I would also recommend too, for anybody that's listening to this and interested, just go ahead and send in questions. And a lot of those questions will probably tie into my presentation somewhere. And when I'm in a spot in the presentation where I can address a question that we have, then I'll go ahead and do so.